Sometimes, the softest sounds leave the longest echoes. They don't announce themselves with fanfare. They arrive quietly like a paw step across old floorboards, or the gentle exhale of breath on a cold window pane. And when they're gone, something about them lingers. A mark, a memory, a whisper. It has been said somewhere between an old poem and a grandmother's lullaby that animals hold pieces of our hearts we didn't even know had chipped away. Not with words or grand gestures, but by simply being, watching, waiting, pressing their little foreheads to our sadness until it thins into something softer. And so, this is the story of one such creature. Her name was Tilly. She was a dachshund, though even that word feels too large for her. A gentle bundle of long spine and earnest eyes, with ears that never quite agreed on which direction to face. She didn't look like magic. She wasn't born beneath a comet or found wrapped in prophecy. She was found behind glass, sitting very still while the world hurried by. But Tilly could dance, not the way ballerinas do, with form and schooling, not with precision, but with joy that burst in crooked circles and awkward hops, with a rhythm that obeyed no rules except the one's joy made up on the spot. And when her tiny paws left the ground, just for a moment, the sorrow weighing down those around her seemed to lift, just slightly, just enough. Her story, like so many good ones, doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with quiet, with an empty porch swing, with damp newspaper clippings in a hallway drawer, with a woman named June who once loved big and brave but who now only spoke to the walls of her own habits. June lived alone in a house that hadn't changed its curtains in 37 years, a house that creaked when it breathed, that smelled faintly of cardamom and lemon oil, and that held in its slanted shelves and sagging armchairs the echoes of another voice long gone quiet. Her days passed a bit like lace unraveling, delicate, slow, and so easy to miss unless you looked closely. She made tea at 8:30, watched the same black and white film at noon, listened to a dusty record at dusk, and always paused at the spot where it skipped, imagining, once again, what that missing beat might have held. Grief has a way of setting rituals into stone, but the thing about grief is, it makes room, not right away and not willingly, but eventually, in the long quiet between songs, in the steam curling up from chipped porcelain, in the way a shadow falls on the hallway floor. There's a place a heart goes before it begins to heal, not forward, not back, just still. And it was in that still place that Tilly would arrive, not as a solution, but as a pulse, a tap, a tender shake of the snow globe, reminding June that the world still glittered, if you remembered to look. Before we arrive at that point in their story, before the footage of tiny paws tiptoeing between rug tassels and the low melody of jazz spin dancing its way through memory, there is something else to hold. A question: what stirs a heart that has grown quiet? The easy answer is love. But love doesn't always come as light or comfort. Sometimes it shows up dressed in unexpected clothes, clumsy, drooling, uncertain. Love, in Tilly's case, came with a tail that wagged against metal bars and a look that asked nothing, but maybe hoped for everything. But perhaps we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's slow down. Sit for a while. There's a chair near the window of June's front room, faded blue, tufted, with a small embroidered pillow that says, "Don't forget to dance." She didn't remember putting that pillow there. It had always just been Dot. It came from her partner, Harry, long ago. One of those silly gifts tucked in a Christmas stocking wrapped around a roll of peppermint candies and a folded Polaroid. In it, she was young but not fragile, mid-laugh, her feet bare on linoleum, spinning to a record player behind her. The caption on the back simply said, "She teaches gravity a thing or two." June used to dance like that all the time. She liked the way the world blurred when in motion, the way a body remembered joy before the mind caught up. But that memory, like so many others, had grown dusty. So when she passed a window display one rainy morning and saw two brown eyes looking back at her, not stern, not pleading, just waiting, she felt something stir. Not recognition, not yet, just the smallest echo. The day had started, as most did, with the forecast, rain tapering off by mid-morning. Gusty winds near the lakefront. Nothing poetic. Just noise beneath her avocado toast and Earl Grey dot. June pulled on her coat. The one with the patch above the elbow she hadn't bothered fixing. She didn't mind the rain. It felt honest, and on Thursdays, the market sold the good honey floral and thick, the kind that clings to the spoon. She intended to walk right past. She always did, but there's something about eyes that don't demand your attention, but quietly invite it, in the dim glow behind the scratched shelter glass. Pressed between a discounted chew toy and a flannel blanket, bearing the name Pepper in faded ink, was a dachshund. Small, stocky, and slightly confused, her ears folded unevenly, like two pages of a book attempting to meet. Her tail beat against the crate in slow, deliberate taps as if keeping time with something only she could hear, and though her posture was wary, head low, knees bent, there was none of the frantic, desperate energy that echoed from the cages around her. She was quiet, but awake, the kind of awake that feels tuned in. June didn't move for a long time. She realized she was holding her breath, and when she let it go, the window fogged up. She turned to leave, then hesitated. "I'm not looking for a dog," she murmured to the sidewalk. But something tugged. A thread caught on an old nail. 5 minutes later, she was inside. 10 minutes more, and a woman from behind the counter was saying something about paperwork. Adoption fees waived for seniors. "She's 4, the woman said, as though that explained everything. Not really a puppy anymore. June met the dachshund's eyes again as she stepped forward. They were a warm kind of brown, the kind with flecks of amber, like tea kissed by sun. She didn't bark or flinch. She just looked. That was all she did. And June found herself doing something she hadn't done in a long, long time. She smiled. Later, when asked why what made her choose that dog that day, when there were hundreds. Over the years she could have brought home, she never had a satisfying answer. Only the knowing. Sometimes, she'd say, it's not what you're looking for, but what finds you anyway. Sometimes, it starts with silence. And somewhere, just beneath it, the first quiet beat of music, waiting to be danced to. The rain had softened by the time June stepped out of the shelter, but the world still smelled of damp leaves and something older, like the way memory might smell, were it made of earth and rust and early November wind. In her arms was a bundle of nervous warmths wrapped in a borrowed tartan blanket. The dachshund didn't wriggle, didn't make sound, just peered up in that way animals do when they're not sure what happens next. But trust you'll take them there gently. She had been given a list of transition tips: staggered feeding, short walks, soft noises, patience, patience, patience. But no amount of pamphlet advice could account for that first moment when a new presence enters a space long kept solely one's own. June opened the front door and stepped inside. The house greeted her as it always did, with the faint creak of a warped entry tile and the sigh of warm air from the floor vent beneath the coat rack. She set the dog down, half expecting hesitation, but the dachshund made no move. She just stood at the threshold, eyes scanning everything slowly, ears twitching toward the grandfather clock's pendulum, then toward the humming fridge, then back to June. "Well," June said, "here we are." It came out quieter than she meant, half whispered, like she didn't want to awaken something unknowingly at rest. The dog blinked once, then shuffled forward 3 cautious steps. When her paw pads touched the rug at the foot of the parlor, she paused, sniffed once, and curled into herself like a comma. Not asleep, not scared, just placed. June didn't push. She made tea, sat in the armchair with the frayed blanket. From the corner of her eye, she saw the dachshund unmoving, ears up, watching. Everything felt unusually sharp and still, like a home just before the company arrives, when you hear every tick of every clock. She left the house that evening, only briefly to take the garbage to the curb. When she came back, she found the dog had moved, not far, just to the patch of sunlight under the living room window. She lay there like she belonged to it. At bedtime, June stood on the landing, uncertain. She hadn't shared her bed in years, not since the hospice cot had squeezed beside it and the nights stopped being about sleep. But as she turned back to flick off the light in the front room, there was the dachshund at the base of the stairs, looking up, head tilted, tail wagging with hesitant optimism. "Too soon," June said aloud, though she wasn't sure if she meant it, for the dog or herself. By the time she'd changed into her nightgown and returned to the bedroom, there was a small brown body already nestled into the folded afghan at the foot of the bed. She didn't shoo it away. Instead, she lay down slowly, and for the first time in a long while, the house did not feel too quiet to fall asleep in. The next morning, June rose before the light had filled the room. Years of routine persisted. Kettle on, slippers shuffled, porch light off. She moved through her habits with practiced care. When she turned to settle into her morning chair, the dachshund sat beside it, awake, waiting. It was strange how ordinary it all was. The dog's presence didn't disrupt June's day. It softened its edges, as though she had always needed a witness to her small rituals. Someone to blink slowly as she buttered toast, to sigh gently as she folded the crossword page. The kind of company that asks nothing of you but space. She tried names that morning, whispered them into the quiet like she was casting stones into the surface of a still pond. Penny, Agnes, Millie. The dog's ears twitched but offered no clue. Tilly, she said, finally, soft, like she was apologizing to no one. The dachshund perked, tail beating softly against the scuffed baseboards. "Well, look at that," June muttered. "Tilly it is." They were awkward companions that first week. Not unfriendly, but unsure. Tilly followed June room to room with a lopsided eagerness, though she always stayed a few steps behind us. If not wanting to be in the way, she didn't bark or whine or chew. She simply occupied corners like folded fabric might. June began to talk aloud more, not in full conversations, but small narrations, that teacups older than both of us, you know. Today, we'll dust those shelves. No arguments. It's soup weather, Tilly. The kind of voice used too long only on plants. One afternoon, June put on an old record, not for any reason, just because habits have small rebellions. Sometimes, the record crackled to life some melancholy jazz standard, whose title had long since slipped her mind, but whose tune she could hum in her sleep. As the notes spun out, Tilly lifted her head from the rug. Then, without preamble or prompt, she rose onto her hind legs, slowly, shaking slightly and spun in a tight, uncertain circle. June froze, hands hovering above the sink. Tilly dropped back to all fours with a comical little hop and immediately sat down with the gravity of someone who hoped nobody had seen, but June had. She chuckled, startled by the sound of it. A short, spontaneous tumble of air that caught like warm candlelight in her throat. "Well now, where'd you learn that?" Tilly tilted her head, ears flopping like bookmarks unfurling. June clapped her hands gently, once. Tilly stood this time with more confidence and gave another half spin, wobblier with a skid at the end that sent her sliding an inch across the tiles. June laughed soft and bright and sudden. The dog trotted over, climbed into her lap, and settled her chin just above June's heart. It wasn't a trick, not yet. But something had been unlocked. That night, the house surrendered to shadows as usual, but June didn't switch off the record player. It played quietly in the background while she read a dog-eared gardening catalogue by dim lamplight. Tilly slept beside her, occasionally twitching a little dreamy electric flinch. June, halfway into a sentence about heirloom tomatoes, whispered into the hush, "You really did dance, didn't you?" No answer, of course. Just the scratch of stylus against wax, the sound of jazz weaving through the air, and a pulse of something nearly forgotten like warmth wrapped inside wonder, quietly unspooling itself between two hearts in the soft dark. The first time Tilly startled at thunder, it startled June even more. It was early evening, the sky gone purple at the edges, and June was peeling apples at the kitchen sink when the first low rumble rolled across the roof like a slow breath. Tilly, curled under the table as usual, flinched so fast her nails clicked on the tile. She scurried not away from the sound, but toward June, tail tucked so tightly it almost disappeared. She pressed her whole self against June's ankle. June turned, knife still in hand, and looked down with quiet alarm. "No need for that." "Little one," she said softly, bending to offer a gentle scratch behind one ear. "It's just the sky, stretching its bones." Tilly didn't move. Her eyes were round, like she was waiting for the world to split open that night. Storm still muttering outside and the windows gently shivering in their frames. June sat cross-legged on the floor. Beside her bed, Tilly coiled like a ribbon under the edge of the nightstand, as if the wood might protect her. Rain tapped gently against the panes like it had something important to say, but no one to say it to. "It's all right," June whispered, one hand resting lightly beside the trembling shape. "I'm here." She stayed like that for near an hour, saying nothing more, just letting her presence speak in the hush between each distant roll of thunder. Eventually, Tilly's shaking slowed, not completely, but enough. The next morning, there was a patch of fur smeared with floor dust. On June's nightgown, she didn't brush it off. That was how it went, those first weeks. A rhythm developed. Tilly hovered never underfoot, but always close enough to be part of the atmosphere. June adjusted without noticing. Setting one mug down instead of two felt less lonely now. Someone was around to clack toenails through the hallway and sigh dramatically whenever she stood up too fast. Each small routine took on a new audience, quiet but receptive. When June watered the piece, Tilly watched. When June organized the mail into tidy, unopened stacks, Tilly observed like it was theater. When June swore softly at the crossword, Tilly would look up calmly, as if to say, "Try 7 down again." It made everything stranger and warmer. There was one morning, early still, with fog hanging low over the yard, when June opened the door to fetch the paper and found her slippers missing. In their place, 2 unmatched socksers, no doubt, but how they made their way from the laundry basket to the doorstep remained a mystery. Tilly sat nearby, tail wagging slowly, head cocked. "Playing house rules already, are we?" June said with something that passed quite close to delight. Tilly didn't answer, of course, but that was the thing she never needed to. They developed ways of sensing each other. A glance exchanged during a kettle whistle. A tail flicked in reply to a humming tune. When June settled into her crocheting after lunch, Tilly would drape herself like a scarf nearby her body, curling into a question mark of watchful calm. And sometimes, if June hummed without realizing old melodies buried deep beneath memory, Tilly would raise her head, sometimes tilt it. On rare, golden afternoons, she'd ditch watching altogether and simply join in. It was during one such afternoon that the pattern shifted. June had opened the curtains, letting pale sunlight spill over the floorboards like a remembered holiday. The radio was playing softly from the kitchen window, something vintage. As always, clarinet mingled with lazy brass. June moved about the parlor slowly, dusting, humming, lost in the rhythm of her chores. And then there was motion, not sweeping, not pacing, but a spin. Her hand on the shelf stilled. She turned, cloth in hand. Tilly stood about 5 feet away, near the corner by the old writing desk. She had gotten onto her hind legs, tentatively, wobbly, and was turning, as if in orbit around a sun seen only by her. The movement was messy, the symmetry flawed, but the joy behind it was unmistakable. June blinked, and then, quite without her permission, she laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. A clean, surprised kind of laugh, rusty with disuse, but bright in its own way. Tilly stopped mid-spin, plopped down like a stone, and tilted her head to one side. "Well, if you're not just a little cabaret, then I don't know." "What?" June murmured, crouching. She clapped once. Tilly's ears perked, and then again. A twirl, this time with a little hop at the end. She slipped slightly on the parquet floor and shuffled back into place like she'd meant to do it all along. From that moment, it began. Not a training, not a game. Something simpler than that, and more profound. Whenever the music came on, the right kind, smooth and swaying and wrapped in old-fashioned strings, Tilly would sometimes rise and spin. Sometimes just for 1 second, sometimes in flurries of lopsided circles, like she couldn't quite contain the sound. A few days later, June clapped again during breakfast when the jazz flute trilled on the radio, and Tilly offered an impromptu spin beside the chair. June laughed with toast half raised to her mouth, crumbs tumbling in slow motion. "Careful, girl," she joked. "I might ask you to do that on command." Tilly, seated now, looked up with something like satisfaction. These weren't performances. They weren't even acts. These were bursts like someone had turned the light on just a moment too early and caught joy in the middle of stretching. Week by week, in subtle increments, the house began to feel reshaped. A stranger wouldn't notice, but to June, it was everything. She heard herself humming more. She saw the spaces between chore and habit filling with music. Sometimes she danced a little, too. Not much, but a sway, a toe tap, a lean enough to remind herself she still knew the rhythm. Tilly would watch, then mirror, then add her flourish. A flash of movement, a quick, delighted spin, Once, June tried to record it. Just once. She set her phone on the windowsill with the pancake spatula holding it upright, pressed record and shuffled back into frame. Then she turned on the radio, instead of streaming, and clapped. Tilly danced. It wasn't perfect. The furniture crowding the background, the lighting leaning too far toward sepia gloom. But it didn't matter, because when June reviewed the clip, she didn't see the house or the time stamp or her own mismatched socks. She saw joy as messy and honest as a bedsheet fort, saw emotion for its own sake, saw something like healing, not in a grand re-entry to the world, but in the gentle bend of a dog putting her whole soul into a silly little spin. And that was more than enough. The days settled into something like rhythm woven with toast crumbs and piano melodies, with a dachshund spinning slowly in whatever patch of light wandered across the floor. The mornings belonged to slippered shuffles and gentle rituals. The afternoons gave way to radio. Music stretched thin across sun-warmed windows. Tilly danced more often now. Sometimes June would speak to her like an audience, and now, presenting the incomparable Miss Tilly, queen of parquet pirouettes. Other times, there were no announcements, just a series of twirls, sometimes unexpected, sometimes on cue with that particular clumsy charm only she could offer, her tail twitching like a metronome, her limbs unsure but committed, the kind of performance that defied choreography, but nailed something far rarer. Joy. She twirled for toast. She twirled for mail slips. She twirled when the kettle whistled too long, and during the record scratch on track 4 of their favorite jazz vinyl. And June she began to smile before the spin even started. It became a habit in the best way, like adding milk to tea or humming when the sun breaks through cold cloud. Tilly danced. June laughed. The world softened. Even the neighbors began to notice. Small, curious heads would sometimes press to the chain-link fence as June clipped. Clothespins to wet shirts. Children with sticky fingers and wide eyes waved shyly at the low-slung figure darting across the yard. "Does she really dance?" one asked. June nodded. "When the music's honest enough." It wasn't long before the younger girl next door, Clara, approached June on her porch step with a timid question between two uneven pigtails. "Can we see what?" June had asked, though she already knew. Tilly, lounging in a puddle of shade nearby, lifted her head. "You ready for your big debut?" June said. Then she clapped, just once. On cue, Tilly rose, twirled. Not one spin, but two, each slightly off balance but spirited. Clara nearly squealed. Her younger brother Colin bounced on tiptoes. "She's like a ballerina, but wriggly." June chuckled. She prefers the term interpretive artist. The word spread gently through the neighborhood, not like wildfire, but like sunlight through lace curtains. A few more neighborhood children began wandering over during porch hour. One brought a feather boa, another a harmonica. The Winslows from down the road painted her portrait on the chalkboard wall outside their garden shed complete with twirling lines and tiny, exaggerated ears. June watched it unfold without expectation. She didn't ask for a crowd, but they came, quiet, curious, filled with laughter no louder than the music. Still, the most important audience never changed. There was always June at the kitchen counter, dish towel in hand. Always Tilly, rising, like the smallest blossom with every note. Always the space between them, charged with something that needed no name. One rainy Thursday, June filmed another clip. Not for the internet, not for posterity, but for her sister, Miriam. who lived 3 towns over and hadn't smiled much since her chemotherapy rounds began. June placed the phone on the mantel, turned on Ella Fitzgerald's Cheek to Cheek, and clapped. Tilly obliged. The video was 31 seconds long. Tilly spun with abandon 3 times, skidded into the ottoman, then paused mid-pratfall to bark a single note, perfectly timed. June's laughter was audible in the background, soft, cracking, genuine. She sent it in a message with no caption, just a heart. 15 minutes later, Miriam called her. It was hard to tell whether she was laughing or crying. Send another one. Next week, she said thickly. Please, that little dog, she just saved my Tuesday. Thereafter, it became a ritual, the weekly Tilly waltz. Always a different tune. Always just a little imperfect. Always the same spark, and somehow that spark began catching places June hadn't expected. Comments came through Miriam's friends, then old college acquaintances. One clip slipped into the digital ether, and in a way that belongs only to this strange century, it began to ripple outward. Total strangers messaged June's niece after she posted a series of Tilly's clips. This is what I needed today. Reminds me of my grandma's old terrier. I forgot what jazz felt like until now. The numbers didn't matter. June didn't know the algorithm of going viral, didn't check TikTok, didn't care who liked or retweeted. What mattered was the way Miriam's voice sounded lighter, the way Clara and Colin put on their own backyard recitals with tutu-clad teddy bears, the way June, sometimes when no one was watching, danced to. One Sunday morning, rain flickering on the roof and a Benny Goodman album rustling through the living room. June stood near the armoire, a cup of tea still warm in her hand. Tilly spun lazily beside her, and June, just for a breath or two, swayed with the rhythm. Her knees complained, her robe tangled. Her feet, once sure in high heels and evening dresses, now shuffled, but oh, how they remembered. Tilly paused to watch. June twirled halfway, caught her footing, grinned. Gotta keep up, dear heart, she whispered, setting her cup down. They waltzed. Not perfect, not planned, not elegant, but true. Wrapped up in a tempo older than either of them, they moved as if sorrow had become music itself, and they, the dancers it had always invited. That night, June lit a single candle in the kitchen. Not for any reason except that it flickered like memory, and that seemed enough. She placed the photo of her and Harry, taken at that 1963 ballroom fundraiser, on the edge of the table. Tilly curled at her feet. The record spun, and June whispered, barely a breath, still dancing, love. Tilly stirred at the sound, her ears flicked, then gentle as falling petals. She turned one slow circle, paused, then another. Her tail thumped softly on the floor, keeping time with something only hearts know. Afterward, June didn't speak. She didn't need to. The house was full. It rang with a song old and ever welcome, and somewhere between grief and healing, a dachshund danced. 2 weeks after the video went out to Miriam, and after a steady trickle of requests for encore performances, June's niece Angela posted a few of the clips on TikTok. Not for fame, it's mostly for herself, because she knew how heavy the internet could feel, and thought, maybe a little dog spinning to Ella Fitzgerald might lift something by sunrise. They'd amassed over 50,000 views by noon, 300,000 by dinner time. The phrase "dancing dachshund" of Dunley Avenue was trending. June didn't know what trending meant, exactly. Her phone had started buzzing incessantly, which she ignored until Angela called with such energy in her voice, June thought perhaps she had won the lottery. "You're on the internet," Angela said breathlessly. "Tilly's famous." "Well," June replied, balancing a plate of leftovers in one hand, "she does have good timing." The buzz grew. Comments poured in, warm, effusive, and oddly poetic in their own way. "I didn't know I needed a dog spinning to Billie Holiday today. But I did. This made me cry and smile at once. Who knew joy has 4 legs and terrible balance? My granddad used to dance like that. Thank you for this." One message arrived from a woman in Ottawa. "I haven't left my apartment in 4 weeks. This made me open my curtains." Another from a teacher in Ohio who had played Tilly's video for her class during a rainy recess. "They all clapped at the end," she wrote. "Even the kids who never clap." Angela tried to explain the magnitude to June likes, shares, duets, remixes, but June just nodded gently. "The only audience we ever tried to impress," she said, "was the one across from the kitchen table." Still, the momentum carried onward. She received email requests for interviews from local news anchors, pet bloggers, even a lifestyle magazine focused on quirky, intergenerational bonds. Someone offered to fly Tilly and June to New York for a morning show segment. "No. Thank you," June said simply, passing a biscuit over to Tilly. She doesn't like escalators. Instead, June continued sharing the videos with Miriam now, a weekly lifeline between them. Their Sunday calls were filled with giggles, requests for specific routines, can she dance to Frank Sinatra next, and theories on what Tilly might be dreaming when her paws twitch mid-nap. The neighborhood responded to kids began chalking messages on the sidewalk near the yard. "Go, Tilly, go," and "Jazz paws forever." Someone left a tiny plastic tiara on the porch. Another delivered a bouquet of daisies with a note, "For the little ballerina." Clara and Colin invited her to perform at their lemonade stand opening. It wasn't a major event, just a folding chairs, a pitcher of tartness, too strong, and a yellowing sign that read, 35 cents plus show equals happiness. But Tilly twirled on cue beside the cooler, and every passerby doubled their donation. Despite the attention, the rhythm of life in the little blue house didn't change. June still boiled her tea at 8:30, still hummed forgotten tunes beneath her breath, still let the sun wander in unhindered. But something was lighter, like a window cracked open in a long stuffed room, like air that had waited a while to be tasted. One Thursday, after dusting the radio cabinet and feeding Tilly her customary carrot coin treat, June sat down and attempted to write a caption for the next week's video. It was harder than expected. Every word felt too loud, too explanatory. Eventually, she typed, "She dances every time the music feels true. We should all be so brave." Angela posted it that evening. It surpassed every earlier clip within hours. That weekend, a busker played a clarinet outside the corner coffee shop, and when June passed by Tilly in her striped sweater at her side, the young man tipped his hat and launched into cheek to cheek. Without instruction, Tilly paused, rose on her hind legs, and did a single, slow spin. The entire sidewalk broke into applause. June bowed, a touch embarrassed. She only dances for the right tune, she said, and he played it honest. One morning, a schoolteacher arrived at the front gate. She introduced herself as Ms. Lively from Dunley Elementary, holding a sheet of crayon drawings, a dozen renditions of Tilly, some with sparkles, some with wings, all mid-whirl. "They talk about her like she's a hero," she said. "Would you ever visit?" June hesitated. She wasn't fond of big groups or fluorescent lighting or anything that required a sin-in sheet, but the children had drawn her dog with reverence. A week later, Tilly trotted into the school gymnasium wearing a purple scarf. The students greeted her with such hushed awe. June worried she might never get her tail to wag again. But then June clapped. Tilly spun twice, then a third time, then belly flopped in front of the smallest kindergartner and rolled dramatically onto her back. The gym erupted in laughter so pure it nearly lifted the ceiling that night. June sat with a cup of cocoa in her lap, Tilly snoozing beside her, worn out in the way only love could exhaust. "Would you believe they wanted your paw print for their yearbook?" she whispered, brushing a bit of confetti from Tilly's whisker. There was no reply, just the steady breath of a dancer at rest. The internet kept swirling. More messages came in. One woman said Tilly's videos helped her bond again with her father, who had dementia. Another said it was the first thing to make her teenage daughter laugh out loud in months. Still, June declined interviews and sponsorship offers. "We sell neither joy nor spins," she once told Angela, "and there's no brand of biscuits worth candling the soul." They had all the recognition they needed. It was in the stillness after a laugh, in a child's squeal on the sidewalk, in the way jazz floated from windows that had been silent for too long. The world, large and unpredictable as it was. I had noticed a dog who danced not for applause but because the music felt true inside her small, hopeful body. And June, after so long remembering joy only as something that once visited, found it again. Every day, on four paws and in wobbly spirals. Not because she went looking for it, but because joy, as it tends to do, found her anyway. The winter crept in like an old friend, one who no longer called ahead, but simply arrived, unannounced, with arms full of cold. The furnace clicked on more frequently, its effort echoing faintly behind every footstep. June began placing Tilly's blankets closer to the heat vents, folding them into perfect ovals each morning, already knowing which spot Tilly would favor by dusk. The calendar turned. December's corners curled slightly from damp kitchen air. Outside, the trees had long since surrendered their leaves. On the windowsills, condensation gathered in shy semicircles, like breath held too long. That week, June unearthed a box of decorations from a closet she hadn't opened in years. The contents smelled like cedar and thyme. There was Harry's favorite, snow globe treater, cliffs under swirling glitter, and the felt penguin garland he'd bought on a whim after a bottle of wine in 1982. She unwrapped it slowly, draped it over the mantel, looked away before her eyes could gather anything painful. Tilly didn't care for the jingling bells or the electric candles, but she adored the rug near the gas fireplace. There, she'd twist herself into shapes meant only for sleep and contentment. On the third night of the storm watch, the snow began. It fell without drama, just a husher, steady hush, softening everything. The air tasted of copper and clouds. June stood at the front window, mug in both hands, Tilly tucked in her lap. Together, they watched the world surrender. To white, the storm was supposed to pass by morning. It did not. The next day brought silence, deep and full, the kind that swallows cars and muffles sirens. Power flickered, stuttered, then gave up. June lit candles and draped a second shawl over the bed. Tilly slept through most of it, waking only when hungry or when the wind slapped a branch too hard against the siding. That evening, June pulled on boots and coat, clipped Tilly's leash gently, and opened the front door to a world almost unfamiliar in its blankness. She intended just a short walk around the yard, a trot out and back. kind of thing. The ice beneath the layers of snow had other plans. One step, then another. June slipped. She didn't fall, just caught herself brusquely, and, while she steadied her footing, the leash flinched from her hand in an instinctive jerk. Snapped from her grasp, Tilly bolted. Not in fear, no, it looked more like direction. A flick of her tail, then a dark blur dissolving into ivory streetlight. June's heart shot up and froze. An ache flashed freezing behind her ribs. "Tilly," she called. Once, then again. No pawprints held long in the snow-just shifting wind, sweeping everything behind it. She marched anyway, through drifts and ice patches, calling, whispering, pleading. Her voice grew hoarser with every minute. Neighbors' homes glowed in pale oranges and battery-powered flickers, but no one answered when she knocked. There were no cars idling, no music upstairs, no movement in doorways. She tried not to think like fear, tried not to think of cars or coyotes or cold past bone. But her fingers began to numb. She retraced her steps, re-looked where the print should be. Her breath came in puffs like worn-out prayers. Her legs, once adept at brisk laps around the schoolyard, quickly begged for rest. By the time she reached Hillcrest and Wilby, she wanted to cry, but the air tightened her face too firmly for tears to shed. Then, faintly, from behind a snow-logged row of apartment storefronts, music. Not loud, not triumphant. Something old and crackling. Polite in its volume, but certain in its melody. Jazz, an off-tempo trumpet, falling into familiar swing. June turned toward it. A low hum of generator was audible now, carving warmth into the silence. She moved faster, stumbled once, hands scraping against a bitter metal pole. The music grew louder. They're a diner, one of those places that never really changed names or menus, where coffee tasted like history and booths smelled of bacon and corner stories. Its windows glowed warm amber from a small generator-delivered heartbeat, and inside, under the open circle of flickering ceiling light, Tilly, on the faded, checkered floor, before a crew of bundled strangers cradling mugs and folded newspapers. She twirled, not in showmanship, not in pride, but instinct. An old rhythm remembered, in defiance of cold. In celebration of music, she spun once, paused, spun again. Her tail thumped once against a barstool base. One of the patrons, a man with a thick scarf and a band-aid on his finger, clapped without even meaning to. Another whistled softly, then stopped, caught in the quiet awe of shared joy. And when Tilly completed a third loop, slightly messier than the first, two, she turned, saw June in the entryway, and ran. Snow shook loose as she bounded forward, pressed herself, full body, into June's knees, whining, licking her bootlaces, circling her like orbit reunited with sun. No one clapped then. Not yet, but someone, a girl at the counter with a hot cocoa in both hands, whispered, "She's the one from the video." And then, only then, applause trickled in. Not loud, not thunderous, just gentle, a room of strangers asking for nothing, offering everything they could with their hands. "She just showed up," the cook said, leaning on the pass-through, eyes kind, rolled under the side door, stood up, and danced to the Nat King Cole Christmas album like it was all she'd ever done. June nodded, still catching breath. She picked Tilly up. "She always finds the warm places," she said, "and knows when to give back." They sat for a while, June with her tea, Tilly curled beneath the counter. Someone shared a muffin, someone else offered hand warmers. They watched snow continue its fall like someone shaking a globe out of longing. When the wind calmed and the streets cleared to possibility, June bundled Tilly tight and stepped into the night. Home waited a mile away, maybe less, but what June carried now wasn't just the weight of a small dog or worry or relief. It was something else. A warmth returned, a knowing somehow, even in winter's hush, joy wandered, and if you listened closely, it tapped out its rhythm on little paws. The first time June noticed that Tilly danced on command, really danced not just in joy or improvisation, was on a rainy morning in mid-March. The clouds moaned low in the sky, a sigh more than a storm, and the windows glistened with a quiet melancholy. June, still in her dressing gown and slippers, had placed 2 sugar cubes into her tea when she said, absently, "Dance, dear." Tilly, half asleep by the heater vent, lifted her head, and then, slowly, rose to her hind legs, twirled once, and sat down squarely, as if awaiting applause. June blinked. She hadn't raised her voice or made the clapping signal. Just the word. Just dance. "Well now," she murmured, "you really are listening, aren't you?" From then on, the cues became part of their language. Spin prompted a whirling tumble of motion. Jazz hands, the phrase stolen from June's. Drama teacher Days would sometimes coax a little wave of paws in the air, though it remained more enthusiastic than accurate. Still, the gesture carried enough charm to make anyone watching beam. What had begun as spontaneous joy had quietly become something more, a shared vocabulary built on loyalty, rhythm, and affection. Tilly loved it, not in the way trained dogs love, obedience, or anticipation for treats. She responded like it was a game, an invitation to belong, to offer joy on command, and to do it gladly. It was June who felt the change the most. She had found herself waking earlier, sitting on the porch with her robe pulled tight and slippers wet with dew, stretching her legs, not because she had to, but because Tilly would want to catch the sunrise with her. She found her hips swaying, more often to music while making lunch, and her feet tapping out remembered steps when she thought no one was watching. Wednesdays brought something new. June had signed them up quietly, tentatively, for a gathering at the town library called Community Companion Hour. It was just what it sounded like. People brought pets, or stories about pets. Some came with scrapbook pages. One woman came merely with a collar held quietly in her lap. The first time they attended, June felt out of place. The chairs were too small, the lighting too bright. But Tilly trotted beside her confidently, tail wagging with understated importance. When it was their turn to share, June planned to just say she brought a cheerful companion. Nothing more, until someone asked, "Does your dog do anything special?" June looked at Tilly. Tilly looked up, expectant, her eyes shining. June hesitated, then softly clapped, without fuss, without showmanship. Tilly danced. A single, graceful spin, then a pause, then 2 more. It caused no explosion of awe, no gasps, but it caused something gentler, smiles blooming across tired faces, a few chuckles, a hand placed gently on a stranger's shoulder. From then on, Tilly became a regular. The people would greet her by name, and she would offer them a turn or a tilt in return. June would read aloud old poetry no one remembered anymore. They spent Thursday afternoons at the library, the quiet aisles echoing gently with the kind of silence that heals instead of isolates. Eventually someone suggested they start a new group, something more interactive, less about loss, more about presence, joy, moving bodies, moving minds. And so Pet Joy was born. It met twice a month in the library's side room, the one with wide windows and floors that squeaked like history. At first, it was just Tilly and a timid golden retriever named Bo who didn't like reflections. Then came Lorna with her parrot, who said hello only when no one was paying attention. Then a man named Victor arrived with a turtle strapped politely into a soft infant carrier. No one questioned it. The rules of Pet Joy were simple. Bring a pet. Move if you could. Smile if you felt like it. Sit quietly if that's what joy looked like for you that day. And in that room, joy spread like a slow flame. Tilly would twirl at request or surprise. June would sway and hum. Others clapped or tapped the sides of their shoes together. It wasn't music as much as it was permission. Permission to be strange, to be soft, to be silly. One Saturday, Lorna brought her grandson, Micah, 7 years old. Elbows too sharp for his sleeves. Sneakers to clean. He didn't make eye contact, didn't speak, clutched a red plastic dinosaur and watched the floor. Lorna touched June's arm before the meeting. He hasn't spoken in months, she whispered. Selective mutism. It's been hard. June nodded. Made no promises. Midway through the session, as Ella played from the Bluetooth speaker and the pets found comfortable splotches of sun on the floor, June gave her cue. Jazz hands, Miss Tilly. Tilly perked. She twirled. She stood, lifting her front paws like flags slightly delayed, slightly crooked, utterly enchanting. Micah stared, then he looked away, and then he looked back. He reached for his dinosaur. Held it still. Dance, doggy, he whispered. It was so quiet. June wasn't sure she'd heard it, but Tilly did. She turned to him, walked over with the poise of a feather on breeze, sat down, then twirled, and the room held its breath. Micah smiled. Lorna burst into tears. Later, June sat beside her in the hallway while the children played inside. How did she know? Lorna asked. June only shook her head. She listens harder than most of us ever learn to. After that, Pet Joy grew. Quietly, but it grew. The library staff left small pet toys in a waiting basket. Children left hand-drawn invitations on the bulletin board. Someone began baking treats to be shared, person and pet alike. Tilly became known not just as the dancing dog, but as the one who made others feel brave. A high school art class painted. A small mural near the lake one weekend's swirls of pinks and blues. A golden sun peeking over water and a brown dachshund spinning mid-air, front paws lifted like wings. It was titled Tilly's Theatre. June stood before it one afternoon, wearing her old yellow sweater and holding a bag of carrots. Tilly sat beside her, tail gently thumping. "Look at you," June said. "Little muse." Tilly sneezed once, dismissively, then leaped up to spin. One perfect circle in the breeze. Behind them, wind stirred the painted clouds, and somewhere inside June, something small and sleeping woke and stretched something better than memory. It was legacy, quiet and wide and warm. The daffodils came early that spring. They dotted the yard like quiet exclamation points, tentative bursts of yellow, daring to believe winter had truly passed. June noticed them the morning she rose to find the world hushed in a particular way. The kind of stillness not born from sleep or weather, but from something more absolute. It was in the way the hallway lights seemed to pause before turning on, in the way the tea kettle whistled more solemnly, slower, in the way the air in the bedroom felt settled too. Settled. Tilly didn't rise to greet the morning. She lay on the Afghan at the foot of the bed, head tucked beneath her paw, her small body curled tightly, unmoving. June approached with the instinctual caution love develops over years. She knelt, hand reaching before thought. One touch, and she knew. There was no drama in it, no final cry, no struggling breath. Just absence gentle and full. June sat down on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap without meaning to. The morning sun carved soft lines across the floorboards and settled over Tilly's still shape. Outside, a sparrow chirped into silence. Eventually, June reached for her shawl. She rose, moved with reverence, doing only what needed doing. A small basket, the blue flannel from the back of the linen closet, and the slow descent down back porch stairs. She chose the spot beneath the dogwood tree. The earth was soft with thaw, and everything around seemed to hold its breath respectfully. She dug slowly, not because it was difficult, but because she wasn't ready to be done. When she finished, she placed Tilly in the blanket, folded her in as if for sleep, and whispered simply, "Thank you." Then she covered her. No funeral. Only the tree above, the breeze shyly combing its early leaves. The wind carried something of a farewell and, perhaps, a melody. Inside. The house felt suspended, like a record paused between tracks. The absence wasn't loud. It sat in the quiet, unassuming corners, the ones only particular kinds of love know how to occupy. That afternoon, June found herself sitting in her reading chair, staring at nothing specifically. Her hands drifted toward her phone without purpose. A message from her niece waited there, unread. She opened it. There was a link and 3 heart emojis. She tapped once. The screen brightened to a newly edited video, a montage stitched together. From sent clips, videos June had all but forgotten. The title slid in like a sigh. The little dog who reminded us how to dance. It began with one of the first videos, a blurry morning. Toast crumbs on the counter, Tilly twirling in uncertain circles, while June's off-camera laughter crackled like firelight. It shifted, a chalk mural. Pet joy, school assemblies, children clapping and shouting her name. June, swaying gently at the edge of a room. The song in the background was an old jazz waltz. Soft, nostalgic, the kind that fills up your eyes before your mind gives permission. By the end, June was still, not broken, not whole, but still she let the device fall gently on the side table and leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. One arm resting over her ribs like something precious had stirred beneath. Summer approached slowly that year. Grief came in pulses, light and deep, but joy, too woven into gestures and echoes. Sometimes June would wake, certain she had heard Tilly's claws clicking along the hallway. Other days, she swore the sunlight on the rug near the fireplace moved just the way her curled body once had. She kept the routines. Tea at 8:30. Vinyl at dusk. She spoke to the house still, to the shadows, to Tilly. At Petjoy, her seat remained empty for a week. Then she came again. No announcements. She brought Tilly's purple scarf, folded simply beside a framed photo. She clapped once, softly, without expectation, and something beautiful happened. Bo, the golden retriever, stood, shuffled forward, and twirled, only once, but enough. The room exhaled together. No one said a word, but they all understood. The dance wasn't over. Joy didn't retire. That fall, she began speaking once a year at Pet Kindness Week at the local school. Children would fidget in their plastic chairs as she stepped quietly to the microphone. She brought a ribbon braided with Tilly's collar tag and tiny glittered dog shoes. She'd hold them up. This, she'd begin, is how small joy sometimes arrives. The children would whisper, some would clap, some would cry without knowing why, and she'd end the way she always did. If the world feels heavy, try humming soft, just a note or two. Try lifting a foot. Try spinning gently. Someone might just twirl beside you. Years passed, not quickly, not slowly. Some afternoons, June would settle into her porch chair, tea gone cool by her knee, and whisper, "Are you still dancing?" And whether by breeze or by memory, it always felt like the answer was yes.